now we are going to turn to, let me hold it up here, Heart of a Stranger, an Unlikely Rabbi's Story of Faith, Identity, and Belonging by Rabbi Angela Buchdahl in conversation with Pamela Dorman. This book I found so beautiful, so wise, so striking, with so many lessons to contemplate and put into practice. And honestly, I think I cried twice. Rabbi Angela Buchdahl serves as the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue in New York City, the first woman to lead this flagship congregation in its 185-year history. Under her leadership, Central Synagogue has grown to become one of the largest synagogues in the world, including congregants attending via live stream in more than 100 countries. Born in Korea to a Jewish American father and a Korean Buddhist mother, she's the first Asian American to be ordained as a rabbi in North America. Rabbi Buchdahl was invited by President Barack Obama in 2014 and President Joe Biden in 2023 to share blessings for the White House Hanukkah party, and has been featured in dozens of news outlets. And Pamela Dorman is Senior Vice President and publisher of Pamela Dorman Books, Viking. So I'll add, they are both here on the screen, I can see. And unmute yourselves and come onto the digital stage.
It's great to be here. As Marianne just said, you are the daughter of a Korean Buddhist mother and an American Jewish father. And even as a child, you identified yourself as Jewish, and soon you wanted to become a rabbi, even when you were young. How did you have both the faith and the chutzpah to aspire to becoming the first Korean American rabbi, and a woman to boot?
So thank you for that first question. I just want to start by just saying thank you to all of you for being here. And I'm just deeply honored to be part of this conversation with people who promote books and love books and share them out in the world. So as a rabbi, I'm big at looking for signs. And I will say that I was born in 1972 in Seoul, South Korea. But a month before I was born, the first woman was ordained as a rabbi in the world. So I would never know that halfway around the world, an event would have happened just a month before I was born that would change the trajectory of my life. But this is the way I often see the divine hand in many things. So I immigrated to America when I was only 5 years old, and my parents made the choice that I would be raised in the Jewish community. My father's family, they all lived in Tacoma. They were all Jewish. And I think my mother, my Korean immigrant mother, I think felt like being Jewish would help me be more American. We could talk about the irony of that. But anyway, I went as a newly immigrated Korean girl about a few months from kindergarten. I barely spoke any English, and I came into my kindergarten class, and all the children looked at me with my seaweed lunches and everything else and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Korea," because that's how I identified myself. And then I remember going to Korea to visit my family and relatives when I was only 7 years old, and we went back for our first trip. And I saw all these Korean children and played with them, and they said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm Korean." And they said, "No, you're not." And I remember the first time that I went to my mother weeping and saying, "I don't have a home." And my mother said, "Home is wherever your people are. You can make any place your home." And this was, in some ways, that encapsulates like my path to the rabbinate is a search for home. I grew up in my father's synagogue. I was already the fourth generation in my temple in Tacoma. So I had a sense of rootedness, but we were, of course, the only Korean faces in that synagogue.
Right.
And we were deeply welcomed, and yet I always felt like I was a little bit outside. When I ventured outside the safety of my Tacoma, Washington, tiny Jewish community, that's when I really encountered people who said, "Well, you do understand that the legal definition of being Jewish is traced through your mother, and you've got a Buddhist Korean mother, so you're not actually technically Jewish." And so there were many ways in which I felt like a stranger. And but here's the thing, I found myself at home in Jewish texts and in Jewish stories and in Jewish prayer I was a little bit obsessed with God as a little kid, and I would make up songs and sing songs to God on the swing set. I started leading my sister in prayers before bedtime. when I was about 8 years old. So there was something that was deeply resonant for me. And one of the things that I think is super powerful, and maybe why I really stayed in it and became a rabbi, is I will tell you the origin story of the Jewish people for a moment. In the Bible, Abraham and Sarah, when they were called to start Judaism, God says to Abraham and Sarah, you have to leave your birthplace, your home, your father's house. You have to go to a land that you do not know, and you will be a blessing. And so
Mm.
Abraham and Sarah pick up and leave everything they know behind, and they go and cross over the river Euphrates, and they go into a land where they are total strangers. And that word crossing over in Hebrew is where the word Iri, Hebrew, literally comes from, Ya'avor.
Mm.
So literally, to be a Hebrew is to be a boundary crosser. And what I recognized is that Abraham's, like, the essence and existential state of being Jewish is to actually know what it's like to have the heart of a stranger, not so that you feel alone or embittered, which is not what Abraham and Sarah did, but as a source of empathy and creativity and resilience, which comes from what it feels like to know what it's like to feel that way. So I saw in that origin story my own story. I also left my birthplace and home. I felt like a stranger, and I realized that was the most Jewish thing about me.
Mm.
Share one last piece. I now, not in my wildest dreams did I think I could become the rabbi of a large congregation in New York, let alone now maybe one of the largest congregations in the world. How does an immigrant Korean with a Buddhist mom do that? Um, I think I honestly realized that my heart of a stranger, knowing what it felt like to be on the outside, I thought that that was a unique experience, that I was kind of the weird unicorn in my Jewish
Right.
community. But when you dig just a little bit beneath the surface in anyone's story, what I realized is that everyone had their own multiple identities they were navigating. Everyone felt like for one reason or another, they were outside or a stranger. And by the way, this is not just a Jewish experience. This is a
Yes.
experience. And that is really what I'm understanding. So knowing what it felt like to have the heart of a stranger became in some ways my superpower for connecting. And that honestly is how I've come to end up leading this community now, the most unlikely rabbi to lead a large New York congregation. And I think that that is the story that I truly want us to tap into at a time when people feel lonely and isolated and polarized and um, at a time when almost every minority group in America and perhaps even white men in America feel like they're the stranger. Maybe actually
Yes.
this is the connecting point for us as human beings, not the thing that divides us.
I think you're right. And I think the fact that was your original identity and is still your identity and is also your strength is something that certainly comes through in this book. I just wanted to talk for a minute about the structure of this book, which we worked on for quite a long time. Angela Duckworth, the author of Grit, said about the book, come for the story, stay for the sermons. And I know your goal when you started this book was to write a book about Jewish spirituality, but it really became a memoir with a kind of twist because each chapter ends with a kind of mini sermon. How did you come up with that structure and why? I mean, it had a huge resonance for me, and I know it has for everyone who's read the book.
Thank you. So I just want to start by saying that stories and books have always been sacred in my family. I'll just say that my Korean grandmother ran a bookstore in her
That's
small
right.
village of Hyungpung. My mother started working in that bookstore when she was 10, and she became a voracious reader, reading everything. And it was books that helped my mom imagine a future outside or a bigger world outside of her tiny town of Hyungpung. She was the first to go to college in her family. I think it's how she could envision marrying my American father. And so books were big. And I remember long, lazy summers when I was a child and we couldn't afford to go to summer camps or anything like that. And my mother was a teacher. So she would make me write books in the summer and she would pay me 10 cents a page. Um, even then, the ID and libraries, I just want to say, because I know there's some librarians probably in this crowd as well. Libraries were my second home. Literally, my mom, who was a teacher, there would be times when we didn't have any childcare, and that was back in the latchkey generation when, kids kind of took care of themselves. But my mother would say, go to the library with your sister, sit in the children's room and read some books. I'll pick you up at 5 o'clock. And so I have such a reverence for books, libraries, bookstores, and storytelling. But I never, even with the practice my mother made me have of writing books as a child, never could imagine that I would have my own or that my own story was worthy of a book. And
Mm.
so I didn't imagine writing a memoir. I really thought, okay, my authority as a rabbi is to teach Jewish wisdom. And that's what I
Mhm.
set out to do. But a teacher, a great rabbi teacher of mine said, all theology is autobiographical, meaning all the events of our lives, our loves and pains, that is what helps us understand our own faith. And so that's why I decided that I needed to tell of some of my own story in order to tell, in some ways, some Jewish wisdom as well. And I hope that people get some of both.
Well, they will. Um, One last I mean, this is a very big question, but this is a very difficult time for everyone, but particularly for people in the Jewish community. Tell us in 1 minute how you are managing to lead a congregation with lots of people who have different views at a difficult time.
Yeah, maybe you've heard the expression two Jews, three opinions. So just imagine 8,000 Jews. But I would say that what I really value is that I think churches and synagogues and community centers have been places where people could come across lines of real difference and polarization. And when you serve something bigger than yourself, meaning like when we're serving in our soup kitchen or when we pray together or just breaking bread and eating meals together,
Mhm.
we see each other in our humanity. And that transcends our ideological differences. So I think having places that are diverse in ideology, these are critical to our democracy, to our sense of community, but maybe most of all to our sense of humanity, that we continue to see each other in our humanity, even when we might vote differently or think differently. So this is the plea, and I actually think that I hope that this book helps further that conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. It's wonderful to talk with you as
Thank
always.
you.
Thank you so much. That was such a great conversation. And also, you should be sure to read the chat because there's a lot of great comments in the chat. So, thank you for coming. And
Thank
hope
you.
everyone gets the book.